I have this pile of computers that I'm about to give to someone else. All of them are fairly unexceptional. Some of them I've already done videos on this channel. I've decided that before I get rid of them, for the rest of the systems, I would subject each one of them to a full video. So there's probably going to be a lot of these videos for the next couple weeks, but for now, we're focusing on this silver HP Pavilion a1206n from 2005. This tower is one that I've had for a couple years now. I did my first video on this system involving its recovery process last year. It's developed a couple issues to do with its motherboard, we'll get to that, but for now, this system would have originally come with an AMD Athlon 64 3200 plus CPU, 1GB of RAM, a 200GB hard drive, DVD burner, and ATI Radeon Express 200M graphics. It's not really the most amazing computer in the world, but thanks to the presence of AMD's Socket 939 platform on the system, it's not really that bad either. This was HP's primary line of consumer desktops back in the day, with it being complemented by the Media Center line of computers with this pretty much same chassis. HP ditched the blue and silver color scheme from their previous PCs and went full-on silver, and personally, I quite like the look of this case. Except for one thing about this specific one, and that's that the drives on the front panel are being covered by this white, glossy plastic, which looks very out of place on this otherwise silver box. Some versions of this case used a matte silver finish on the covers, and some of them, like this system, used this glossy white finish. So I'm not really sure why there was a difference there. As mentioned previously, this machine comes equipped with a LightScribe DVD writer, branded by HP themselves. Annoyingly, this case has these advertisement stickers which weren't uncommon with HP systems, but look terrible, especially in this PC's case, when these have started to yellow, along with the other white plastic on this system, which is why I don't like it nearly as much. Below that we have an expansion bay, or what's left of it. This would have had a second cover and eject button like the top drive, but for whatever reason, the entire mechanism is gone. Either someone had to take their rage out, or what I think is more likely is that there was a 5¼ inch device that was not an optical drive, so in order to use it, you had to take the cover off. Below that we have a card reader, which has a proprietary bezel to the system, so if you wanted to take it out and use it in something else, you'd have to take the bezel off of it, so it's not really ideal. It also means you can't put anything else in that bay without needing a special bezel for it, or having to remove it entirely. This card reader can do Smart Media and XD, Compact Flash Type 1 and Type 2, SD and MMC, and Sony Memory Stick. And there's also a single USB 2.0 port. Below the card reader, we have a cover which, when opened, reveals the rest of the I/O on the machine. You might notice there's another hole in this computer because this PC previously had a floppy drive. I've since removed it. What I didn't realize is that the blank basically has to be punched out and is effectively garbage. You can't reuse it. Below that, we have two USB 2.0 ports, a full-size 1394 port, headphone, microphone, and line-in jacks. Below that, we have more HP advertisement stickers that look ugly, the power button with a blue power LED. Worth mentioning that unlike the Pavilion Slimline and newer A6300F, this machine does not have an amber LED as well. It's only blue, so when the machine goes in standby, instead of changing the color, it just pulses, like most PCs do. It also gets stuck easily because it's kind of not designed very well. Below that we have an amber hard drive LED and the HP model, as well as the stickers for the ATI graphics, Athlon 64 CPU, and the Windows XP sticker, which is faded over time. Finally, this front panel has several deep scratches in it in this area only. This is pretty much the only damage to this system, the rest of it's in pretty good shape. So this PC really just could benefit from a whole new front panel. On the rear, we have the power supply with a diagnostic LED that will blink if there's a fault. We have PS2 keyboard and mouse ports, a parallel port, VGA port, 4 USB 2.0 ports, another full-size 1394 port, Ethernet, digital audio out, and microphone, line out, and line in jacks. There's also a messy 92mm cooling fan, a sticker with some voltage information, and the expansion slots. This PC had a video card and sound card previously equipped, but no longer has them. I forgot to put blanks in, so whoops. The only device installed is a modem, of course, which would have come with the system new. And they're all being held in with this toolless bracket, which on this PC is actually kind of decent. On the top of the machine, we have an HP info sticker with the product number and serial number of the box. The bottom side of the case has a more detailed info sticker, the spots where the rubber feet used to be, and a little bit of intake on the bottom. Though while the PC is designed to be slightly raised up in this area, it's only by a couple millimeters, so it's not really that useful. On the right side of the PC, we have the Windows XP Home Edition product key, and on the side panel, we have some ventilation, mostly over the CPU heatsink and power supply area, and for the hard drive, which is a welcome addition considering that HP's previous boxes were completely closed off and had pretty much no intake at all. With the case opened up, the only other issue with the chassis is that there was a green drive toolless mounting bracket that was attached to this case, meaning that you could remove the drives without needing any tools, obviously. However, that bracket has since broken, so there's now pretty much nothing to hold the drives in other than luck. The original power supply in this machine was manufactured by Hypro and is rated for 300 watts. The only real interesting connector is that it has native SATA power, since not everything had that back in these days. Otherwise, it's all just Molex and floppy power connectors in addition to the required connectors for the motherboard. To get at the drives on this PC, you have to remove the front panel, which, like most HP systems, is held in with a couple snaps. The optical drive is an HP DVD Writer 740, which is actually just a rebadged HLDS drive. This was in the DC7600 for a little while, but it's the original drive to this PC. We'll talk more about it later. The only other interesting thing about it is that it's an IDE drive. To get the hard drive out, it's a bit more work. You have to unscrew the front I/O first because the cover extends down just far enough that you can't remove the hard drive without it getting in the way. It's kind of not that great, but what can you do? I didn't get the original hard drive with this machine, so I've stuck in a WD Caviar 120GB drive. No idea if this had a SATA or IDE drive, but this is what I had, and it's pretty much about as old as the system, so it's not really that different. Under the heatsink, we have an upgraded AMD Athlon 64X2 4200 plus CPU. The most that this computer can support is the 4400 plus, so the CPU is effectively maxed out. The motherboard it's being used on is a bit interesting. The original board to this system is the Asus A8AE-LE. This is actually a drop-in replacement motherboard. The original died of capacitor plague, and this motherboard is also on its way out, but for different reasons. There are several small issues with this computer, but probably the most annoying is that not all of the RAM slots work. You might notice that the slots the RAM were in are not the ideal slots on an AMD system. That's not because I wanted to put them that way. If you attempt to use both slots to get dual channel, the system won't boot. This machine also only has two 256 meg sticks for a total of 512 megs. I wanted to do this video with 1 gig of RAM, but when I tried to put more RAM in the system, it also didn't boot. Assuming that the RAM did work normally on this system, you could put a total of 4 gigs in it, but as it stands, I can barely put a whole lot in here because basically none of my RAM wants to work in it. It has both IDE and 2 SATA ports, with contact points for 2 more SATA ports, standard front panel headers, including the power button, 2 USB 2.0 headers, the front panel audio header buried underneath the modem, and a FireWire header. This machine has 3 PCI slots and a full-size PCI Express X16 slot, the ATI IXP400 South Bridge, the chipset heatsink for the ATI RS482 chipset, the Realtek ALC658 AC97 audio chip, the VIA VT6307 chip for the FireWire, and the Realtek RTL8101L Ethernet chip, capable of 10100 speeds, or fast Ethernet. This machine also does have a single bulging capacitor, though I don't believe that is the source of all of the issues for this system, since that's only a recent development, and this board had issues long before that. While filming, I also noticed another damaged capacitor, but not quite in the same way. It's not bulging, it actually appears to just be torn on the side, something I've never seen before. So that's kind of about it for the internals. It's a fairly boring machine, it's fairly standard. Cable management is unsurprisingly horrendous, but I don't think you can expect it to be good on an OEM PC from the mid-2000s. One of the legitimate positives about this system is that other than the hard drive noise from the replacement hard drive, the fan noise is pretty low and the system runs fairly cool, even with an upgraded CPU. Before we get into the OS, the BIOS on this machine is fairly unremarkable, as typical for an HP machine. It's version 3.15 from January of 2007, the latest revision. The onboard video memory size is set to 64 megabytes with no way to change it, and other than the typical device settings you might expect at a BIOS, there's pretty much no other interesting things about it. It's fairly basic. It does have a hardware monitor, which is good, I suppose, but otherwise, there's nothing else to this BIOS. And other than the presence of the boot menu, obviously, and the ability to boot into System Recovery and the LAN boot ROM, there are pretty much no other features of this BIOS. The OS is unsurprisingly Windows XP. This would have shipped with XP Home Edition, however, if you saw the Recovery Mia video, you'd know that I did XP Mia Center Edition instead. By default, the image creates its own HP Administrator account instead of allowing you to create your own user account. Also, the HP PhotoSmart Premiere application is pinned to the Start menu. This machine also comes with quite a bit of junk, including various online services, a ton of links to things, a ton of HP software for other products, a program called HP Rhapsody, a trial of Microsoft Office 2003 Standard, Microsoft Works 8, Movie Auto Producer, Netscape 8.0.4, all of these support and recovery utilities, including PC Doctor, which doesn't run on this system because apparently it's not licensed to run on this system. Quicken 2006, Real Player, Sonic Digital Media Software, the various user guides for this machine, along with Adobe Reader 7, Windows Digital Media Enhancements, HP's own DVD player software, Microsoft Money 2006, and, of course, the Windows XP Media Center program. The Media Center program itself has shortcuts to HP Games and HP PhotoSmart, as well as a ton of other shortcuts that are involved with various pieces of software that would have come with the machine. Otherwise, it's about what you would expect from Media Center, and despite this having relatively basic integrated graphics, the program runs just fine on this machine. Now, modern web browsing on this machine is a bit of an interesting situation. This CPU is capable enough for still very basic web browsing on this machine. However, it's being held back a lot by the low amount of RAM on this machine, meaning it's practically unusable. Of course, it would be better if it had more RAM. I'm willing to do that, but because of the issues it has with not being able to work with more RAM, it's practically shooting itself in the foot. I'm sure the lackluster integrated graphics aren't really doing a whole lot of favors for it either, since it's stealing so much RAM. Because I am dumb, I wanted to try gaming on it anyway. Just a couple of things from back in the day. Some stuff works fine, like Need for Speed Underground on pretty much lowest settings, and at 640 by 480. Even just increasing the resolution to something like 1024 by 768 brings us back to reality. It's a similar situation with another EA game, SimCity 4, which with a smaller city will run, but as typical with this game, when you try and load a big city, things don't end well. This might actually be the first system I've tested where this game straight up crashes loading the big city tutorial. This is pretty much what I expected on just about any integrated graphics chipset. Obviously, this computer does have a PCI Express X16 slot, and I have used it previously. This power supply does not allow for any external power, and realistically it probably can't provide enough power for that anyway, even if it had a connector, so your options are a bit limited. But the RAM issue doesn't help either. This is only running in single channel mode, and there's barely any of it to work with to begin with. Of course, it can do basic games, as to be expected, but outside of that, it's not really that capable. The only other things I bothered with testing on this system were the drives. I didn't really get very far testing the DVD drive because it actually doesn't really work. It doesn't really read any CDs at all, and it reads only a small selection of DVDs I have. This seems like the result of a dirty laser on the drive, which I attempted to correct, but that attempt was unsuccessful. And I don't have any replacement drives laying around, so this is just what this computer has. Some of these HPs have second drives instead of an expansion bay, but this one just doesn't have one. And that hard drive, other than being a bit loud, works just fine. It's a SATA 2 3GB per second drive, its speeds are about what you would expect on a drive from this time, and since it's not even close to the original drive at all, there's no point in further critiquing it. So that's about it for this system. On the surface, it's not a completely horrible XP system. It technically works just fine, but because of its motherboard issues, while there is potential, it's kind of just thrown away. The reality though is that the upgraded a1206n processor is kind of just being wasted in this system. The lack of RAM and lack of really any substantial graphics mean that if you wanted to run any higher performance application to take advantage of that CPU, well, you'd be held back in those other areas. Mainly, the biggest problem is just the RAM issues it has. I wanted to do this with at least 1 gig of RAM. That alone would probably make the system a lot better. But because this motherboard kind of sucks, well, that's not possible. Replacement motherboards from this time do exist, but they can be fairly pricey, and to also replace the front panel, it's practically about as expensive as a replacement system. These HPs aren't really rare or unique in any way. They made lots of these with lots of different configurations. You can probably find a better one for either free or not a lot of money. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up with another one of these in the future, given how common they are. Now, one of the other things that's possible with this box is that the components could be gutted in favor of newer components. The case and motherboard and power supply form factors are all standard, so you could put whatever motherboard you wanted in there. In theory, I could build my actual main desktop into this case and it would work fine because everything is standard. But I don't have any other components to replace in the system, so while there is potential for this box to live on as something else, I'm just not the one to be able to unlock that potential. Oh well, that's kind of just how it goes sometimes, I guess.